right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the TFTuesday Podcast. My name is Zill. It's great to have you back again this week. I am really excited for FWA, which I will be attending this weekend, and really excited to go to the convention given that I have never even really been in that vicinity of the US before. I've been further south than that, but not to Georgia or really beyond stopping over. So really excited for that and going to be seeing some new and familiar faces there and maybe potentially recording an underground podcast given they didn't put me on the schedule, but that's okay. There's lots of TF stuff there, so I'm excited for it. Today we have a very special guest coming back to join me today to talk about a lot of different TF stuff. But before we get to that, as always, just a reminder that you can always check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TFTuesdayPod if you'd like to help support us. Every little bit helps. We get new Patreons all the time, and I always appreciate that. So shout out to No Way for joining our little Patreon crew on Discord, and it really helps keep the show going. So if you are interested, feel free to check us out. All right, now that that's out of the way, I'm really excited to welcome back BinturongBoss. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm BinturongBoss, aka BinturongBoy. Yeah, it's fantastic to be back on here again. I'm very excited to start talking more about TF and bringing in lots of new goodies and stuff like that. Thank you for bringing me on again.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you have the illustrious distinction on being on all 3 seasons of the podcast. So, very special, I have to say.
Hoping to keep that ball rolling, until everyone gets sick of me. But even then, I'll keep going. You ain't gonna stop me.
Nah, you can't stop a Rolling Stone and all that good stuff. So, so I'm really happy to have you on. And one of the topics that I'm really excited to chat with you about is slow burn TF, which was actually one of the topics that our Patreon selected for this past month. And we've kind of talked a little bit offline to some degree about it, but I was curious to get your kind of like initial thoughts on how you feel about slow burn TF, be it over like, a day or a week or a month or even longer.
Well, first of all, I was actually one of those people that have actually voted on that topic specifically. So,
very nice.
It's quite funny that the stars aligned there. I'm actually very in favor of it. Like, I really like the longer the TF, the better, in my opinion, because I feel like it has quite a lot of like changes both physically and psychologically, which is always the fun part, as well as the whole TFL. Like, I always personally find that like fast TFs are kind of like disappointing, but not disappointing. Like, it's like, oh, it's over. Like, oh man. Like, I can imagine it being like overwhelming, and I can see like both sides, like the fast one being kind of like, oh, like an adrenaline rush and something like that. But I also really like the really slowness of it. Like, just imagine slowly turning into a dog over the sport, like the span of like, I don't know, like months, even a year. Like, how much can happen then? Like, how do you conceal all that, or how does the person like react to all that? Like, did they fight it? Did they give in straight away? Did they actually even try and push for it to be fast? But it's like it's been held back and made them longer. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's so much potential and it's so much fun.
Yeah. I definitely agree. And I think one of the interesting things about it is, we're all interested in transformation as a concept. And, we have people who talk about like, like we talk about post TF a lot. We talk about like, the lead up, the triggers, the scenarios and all that stuff. But like the actual change is the thing that draws us in. So when you stretch that out, it's kind of like you're stretching out like the good part between like the two ends almost. And it's almost like, the longer you make it, the more you get to experience all those little things over a span of time. And one of the things that I always think about when I think about slow burn TF is those ones that last, I would put my definition around it as like a minimum of a month, but they can last for like years and years. And one thing that interests me is that adjustment process during the actual changes, because in a way you're kind of using a little bit of your post-TF brain in the sense of it's like, okay, this is my form now. How am I dealing with it in the moment based on everything that's come before? But also, I know that there's more to come. And so to your example of going through like a dog TF over the course of a year, it's like, okay, what is the order in which things start to change? And then, how do I accommodate each one of those changes as it comes to me and starts to impact my life? And on top of that, like, how does that affect how other people interact with me? Like, is this a reality changing TF where people are going to start treating you more and more like you were always a dog? Or are you having to navigate a situation where you have to slowly start to disclose this almost condition of sorts to people so that they know it's like, yeah, well, in 3 months, I'm going to be Fido. So I really hope you can help me get my finances in order.
That's actually a very good point. It is literally a case of it's not only the TFE that has to kind of deal with it, it's a case of the environment and the people around it, which is
Yeah.
also something I think a lot of people don't touch on so much. It's normally just the TFE, but something that I always found very interesting in TF is literally the environment and the people around. Like if you've got like say a partner, what does the partner respond? Like how do they react? Like like that. And it's like you said, if they're slowly turning into a dog, for example, did they just kind of give into it, or did they just kind of fight it, and like how do they conceal it and all that stuff? Like it's so vast, and it's like I feel like people don't touch on it that often because people like, I want it and I want it now, which is fair enough, absolutely fine. But it's like I feel like there's so much more potential in long burning TFs as well, and I'm really hoping to touch on that because I'm actually working on something behind the scenes, as in for myself. As some people may have seen, I've been posting slowly a comic, which, spoiler alert, that's a fast TF. But I have been working on something for myself that actually might touch on such a subject as a long TF, which is what I've always wanted to do for a really long time. Because I've always really enjoyed that in TF. Like, literally the idea of, like, it's a month, but you got finances to pay. What do you do about that? What do you do after? Like, can you even, like, it's that almost anxiety, or like, what's going to happen afterwards? Like, are you going to still be able to go out? Or if you do, is it going to be normal? Is it going to change? Like, is everyone going to act the same? Or, you know what I mean? Like, it's got so much potential. It's like it makes my brain go ooh, ooh. Like it makes my creative juices go flowing like crazy when I think about slow burn and TF, because I'm like, there's something like, for example, a punishment one. Like if we go back to something I touched on before, like punishment TFs, it's like, can you imagine, like, say for example, a thief stealing treasure or an egg or something like that, and they slowly but surely turn into the thing that they stole or something related to it, whether it be, say, a treasure chest or a fox, or the thing that they stole, like an egg, like a dragon or a chicken or whatever, but very slowly, and it's like getting caught red-handed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you wear it like a scarlet letter almost, right? Because then it's like everyone knows exactly what you did to be TFing in that way. It's like, oh, you're turning into a dragon. Well, how did that happen? And it's like, well, there was this egg. And it's like, okay, so you did this to yourself, basically. And then it's like, how do you navigate other people's reactions to that as well, while you're also grappling with like your physiology going absolutely haywire?
Exactly. It's just like, can you still get away with like doing what you can, or is it going to be like you're going to stick it like a sore thumb? Like, there's not going to be a wanted poster if you're pretty obviously like turn into the thing that everyone told you not to do.
Yeah, they're gonna know immediately. One of the things I really like in slow burn TF, actually, that as like a trope I've seen in a few cases, is like the person who's painstakingly documenting what's happening to them, but they're doing so not just for like posterity, but also because they're trying to like find a cure. And so it's like the classic is always like the researcher or something, but it's like, yeah, I was playing around with science that wasn't fully ready. And, now I'm being hoisted by my own petard. The changes are happening to me because I was the test subject or whatever. And I'm desperately trying to, find something that will stop this. But things are now more difficult for me. And as this progresses, it's getting harder and harder. And I feel like, I'm getting closer to curing that change, but oh no, now I don't have thumbs, and how am I going to deal with this? Like I love that trope. It's just it's so spicy. It's very spicy in my opinion.
I 100. It's like zinger spicy. It's so good. Funny enough, someone was talking to me about, or my partner, sorry, she was sharing something that someone writ for her in like 5 minutes, and it literally had that same premise of it was a diary sort of layout, and it's like day 5, day 9, and then it literally goes at the end, it goes day like literally like and it's like, I am now a happy little kitty catty. I just don't think about things. I just think about being a kitty cat, and I'm just like, oh, I love that when it ends like that, and it's like, have they given into it or have they not? Who cares? At the end of the day, they wrote down that they're the thing now, and it's like, it's not just the TF, it's also the documentation and seeing it progress, where they, like, some people fight it at first, some people don't, but then they fight into it. Or some people talk about how they got caught in public, like trying to conceal their tail or something like that, or like they got paws for hands and they can't work anymore, and then they've got difficulties with that, and it's like, but in the end, like you said, comes out of the result, they turn into the thing at the end of the day. It's just how long it takes.
It's inescapable, and I think that element of inescapability is really alluring as a TF fan, to be like recognizing that something is happening and realizing as well that it's going to happen no matter what you do, but also you have the time to kind of relish it for better or for worse sometimes. And I find that so interesting. And, one of the things I also think about when I think about like slow burn TF is there's always a bit of a debate as to like what is the perfect length of time for a transformation to happen. And when I've thought about it before, I generally gravitate towards something like a year. I think like a year is a really good like meaty length of time, so that you can like notice all of the changes over time. And, if you're documenting it, you can see the progression and stuff. But I was curious to get your take on it. Like, is there an ideal length of time for you when it comes to slow burn TF? Like, is it years and years, or is it like there's a specific amount of time that in your mind you're like, yes, that is the perfect amount of time of balancing between, the changes and then finally becoming the thing that you want to be or are being punished to become?
Ooh, I gotta be fair. I normally, the first thing I think of is literally like I said, like I was like, ooh, months, and then I was like, ooh, year though. But then like the year is even better.
Years even better.
Years are even better, but I'm also just like, a year is generally a very good stance because it's prolonging it so much longer than a month. Like a month is still a long time, but a year is like, you know how long a year is, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not like, you can't just fast forward it or whatever. It's like, you got to kind of try and make your life still livable if you can,
Yeah.
It could really drag on. Or sometimes I like to think about it, if it's a year, what if it's like once a month you had this kind of boost, so it kind of like almost like PMS sort of thing, or like, you kind of get the monthlies, and it's like, but it's not like the monthlies in that sense. It's literally like you're turning even more into the thing,
like getting that booster to your changes.
Yeah, but it's like once a month, and you have to try and figure out, when is it going to come? How long much is it going to be? Like, that's what I like to think about sometimes when it's like the year one, or even years.
Oh, that's so cool.
Or very, very slowly maybe, or certain things might trigger it if it's in a year, and you've got to try and figure out what it is. Or, like you said, find a cure if you can. It's like a year has a lot more time to like have various scenarios in it than I feel like a month does.
And I always think, like, when I think about like the quote unquote realism of the TF, which I know is like kind of like besides the point because TF is fictional, but when I think about like the realism of the TF, I think that like what's nice about a year is that kind of progression of changes. First of all, it's still slow, but it's like you will notice things like day over day, probably to some degree. But it's also like a year is a good length of time for someone just in general to like have changes happen to them, growing as a person, or, like working through their own stuff. And the human mind is kind of adapted towards working through that kind of change at that kind of a progression. When we think about like really rapid changes, I mean, again, this is all like fictional, so we can imagine whatever we like, but if it happens too quickly, you could think about the idea of like, psychologically, what does that do to your mind? Like, how do you even comprehend what happened to you, it might make you go a little bit crazy, right? So having like a nice length of time, and I think a month would be good for this too, but like I think particularly with a year, it's like you have that amount of time to properly process and reflect what is happening to you, to, like I said before, get your kind of life in order, be it for, preparing for what might happen or trying to stop it or what have you. And then I guess settle into just taking the punches as they land. And to your point around like having a monthly boost, I think that would be so cool if it was like irregular and not knowing like what day it's going to be. It's like, oh, I don't know, it's been like 32 days, I feel like I'm kind of late for the burst, when is it going to happen? And there's like almost like a mounting anxiety of like, oh gosh, what's it going to be? Am I going to lose my thumbs now? Like what's going to happen? I love that unknown. And you even though you're going through a change, the unknown of what's going to happen next is so alluring.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny enough, something I have written down in my project that I want to touch on. It's literally just like, it's almost keeping it fresh in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, it may be not as fun for the TFE, but it's like the idea, I mean, maybe, who knows?
Yeah.
But it's the idea of like, yeah, exactly. It's the idea of like, it's a year, so it's always keeping it on your toes in a way. Like you said, it's like, is it going to be at the end of the month? Is it going to be at the beginning of the month? Is it going to be at the month at all? Is it going to get like backlog, for example? Is it going to happen twice in 1 month? That's such a cool idea, in my opinion. And it's like why I love long bursts TF as well. And it's just the idea of it being almost agonizingly painful in terms of like how prolonged it can be. Because it's like, can you imagine when you're so close to the end, you're
just like, let it finish.
You're just like, please let it end, or, come on. Like, either way, you're like, let it end. But it's like, come on, I'm so close. So it's, please, I just give in. You know what I mean? It's like, it has such, in a way, it has actually kind of like both endings that actually kind of merge into one. Because at the end of the day, you want it to end.
Yeah.
It's like
be it because it's been like such a journey and you just want to get that final thing you want, or alternatively, it's been like so distressing and you're just like, oh my gosh, like I'm at month 11, just let it finish.
I got a Christmas dinner tomorrow. I forgot to say, just let it end. I don't want to go.
Yeah, no,
the boss wants me in on New Year's Day.
Yeah, I don't want to go. Please, just let me finish becoming a dog. Yeah, I'm sitting here and I'm like, because this is where my mind goes, I'm like, wow, I can like imagine how that would go for a pool toy TF. That would be really cool. But
that would be. Oh, that'd be fantastic. Oh, that would be so cool.
You could even do it to like, it would start in like June or July or something for our Northern Hemisphere friends, and it would end when it's like pool season again. It's almost like, you're going to start now and you'll be ready in time for next year's pool season. I think that would be really cool. So.
Oh, that actually would be such a cool idea. Or like, again, going back to Christmas, it's like, you're like got cursed or whatever, or like you open a present, or like, you get selected or whatever, you get to be Santa's reindeer, and it's like, but it's chosen for next year, and it's like, you slowly TF throughout the entire year to get ready for Christmas Eve. It's like, but how cool of an idea is that? Like,
so good.
That's why I love thinking about things like long term. It's just the idea of like, it could be so prolonged, and it's what can happen between then and now, like, or then and the end.
Yeah. Or like it's like a Halloween based one, and it's like, oh, you pissed off the witch and now you're going to become her familiar, but she's going to make it take a year so that, you're ready for next Halloween to like fully assume that role. And it's like the whole time the person's like, no, I don't want this to happen. And she's like, well, you fucked with me, so now I'm fucking with you. I don't know what to tell you, buddy. Like,
well, too late now. It sucks to be you, I guess.
Yeah.
Or like, something I've always thought about, I was just thinking about, to be honest, but I sort of think about it quite a lot, is, how like Brother Bear, they always talk about how like Kenine's like the youngest brother and he wants to be the big brother.
Yeah.
But something like that, but with really long TF. So someone who's like, I'm not like, he's obviously getting close to, he's obviously of age, but he wants to be like an adult, or they want to be an adult, and they're like, come on, I want to be like boss man or something like that, or like, I want to be like older so I can do I don't know, whatever. Like, so they stop
Yeah,
being like the younger sibling or something like that. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But they're of age. But the only way they start, but when they start coming of age and stuff like starting aging up, like on their birthday and stuff. Also, they start TFing, so they get their birthday wish,
But
but
it's
not how they
twisted.
want it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
monkey's paw. Yeah,
That's it. That's it.
yeah,
Yeah, it's literally like that. Where they like every year they start TFing more and more. So literally, when they get to like I don't know, 30s or something, if they're like 20 years old and they get to like 30, that's like 10 years of like getting older. But it's like they're turning into like say for example a bear or something like that.
yeah.
You know, like they get their want. You know, they're big. They're awesome. They're powerful. They you know,
Yeah. Oh, that's
but
so
it's
good.
like it's a bear though. It's like.
Yeah, it's like you got your wish, but at what cost? You wanted to be the big
Yeah.
one. Well, now there you are. You're the big one.
See, that's what I always loved about like Brother Bear, like why it's like one of my favorite movies. It's not just because it's TF, it's literally that idea of like the monkey's paw. Like you said, it's like
Yeah.
you wanted to be, you know, the big brother, you know, you wanted to be like awesome and, you know, do this thing. Here you go.
Yeah. Oh man. I think the one thing I will say that is sometimes a little bit frustrating with slow burn TF is that it's kind of hard to kind of depict that fully sometimes in like an artistic medium unless it's like a sequence or a comic, just because again by its very nature, like oftentimes writing does obviously lend itself quite well to this, you know, like for example with the journal entries that we've talked about. So I guess my question for you is, when you think about depicting like a slow burn TF through it, either a sequence or a comic, what kind of things do you try to implement so that the audience fully understands the length of time that's actually passing between like different frames or different parts of the sequence or things like that?
Ooh. I'll give you some examples.
Mm-hmm.
If I was, or scenario, sorry. If it was a single piece, so a single body
Yeah.
piece with a background, I would do something maybe arty brain going at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something like a calendar in the background. So it's
Yeah.
like it falls off. It's fallen off and showing like X's on the mark. So it's symbolic of saying, look, time has passed.
Yeah.
Like time it is passing. So if it was a single piece like that, maybe something like that. And again, bringing in that whole idea of the calendar and time passing. If it was a comic or a sequence, I would
Mm-hmm.
also do environment. So you got seasons, for example. So if
Oh
it was,
yeah.
say, for example, a year long TF, and if it was like one panel, not sorry, one page comic
Yeah.
or 4-part sequence, I would probably do something like, you know, spring, summer, winter/autumn sort of thing. Like literally use the environment to tell the story as much as the main character. So the main
Mm-hmm.
character could be wearing like spring wear, summer wear, winter
Yeah.
wear to show the passage of time. So it's like it's trying to get. I always recommend like trying to use not just like try not to make it too convoluted. Literally try and keep it simple,
Mm-hmm.
but also like thinking about it logically. Like how would you show passage of time? Well, we got seasons, we've got calendars, you've got clothes, you know, even food, selected holidays and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like finding those cues that help to communicate to the audience that time has passed through things outside of just the changes.
See, I'm not much of a writer, so I literally have learnt to kind of use imagery to tell the story or
Mm-hmm.
tell basically what's going on,
Yeah.
really. So I'm very kind of like almost aware about this sort of thing. I always kind of
Mm-hmm.
think about these things way more than like writing it down like, oh, dear diary, today I grew a tail slightly. And then it's like day, I don't know, 50. It grew longer. Like, I can't do that, to be honest. I
Mm-hmm.
love to, but I can't. So it's like sometimes it's easier or more simpler to just kind of literally just think about it logically. That like, how would you display that like in a drawing?
Yeah.
So those are like literally just a few pointers I could think of off the top of my head that I would use to explain
Yeah.
or show passage of time.
That makes sense. And yeah, I think like obviously your brain is wired more around the artistic cues and the visual stuff. So that makes sense. So then I'll ask one final question before we go into our next topic. If you had to go through a slow burn TF,
Ooh.
which one would you pick and why?
Oh my gosh. I was no. Right. I had three things in my head.
Okay.
There's one that's not existing, but there's two that do exist. But
Okay.
yeah, the one that doesn't exist is obviously a dragon.
Mhm.
But the two that do exist is the wolf and a binturong. I was
Mhm.
thinking the binturong might be cool because you can. It's not recommended, but you can keep them as pets.
Right.
Obviously, exotic only, but also you can obviously rescues and wildlife centers, and it's an animal that can exist with a human, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not like a bear. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously people keep bears as pets or whatever, but not something I'd want to do, to be honest. But to each their own, I guess. But
Yeah.
like, I was just thinking something that, or if it's a husky, not a husky, sorry, a wolf, or I don't know, some sort of canine, I guess, because then or I'm gonna be fair. If it wasn't a wolf, I would probably go for a cat.
Okay.
I think a cat would be actually kind of cute, to be honest, because then it's like, I wake up and I'm feeling slightly flexible. How can I do this? And it's just like, yesterday I couldn't get out of bed. Now I can actually like be really flexible and stuff. You're like, you're like doing all of these like weird little cat habits and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But I also like. I just like binturongs a lot, and I think it would be really funny to like try and fight that urge to like shave all that shaggy fur off. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
binturongs could get really fluffy, and it's like that tail. Can you imagine that tail like
Oh my gosh.
growing?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my god, it's great because binturong tails can grow longer, as long or longer than their body. So like, can you imagine that as the size of a
It
human?
would be massive. It would be
And it'll
absolutely
be like,
massive.
and I'm like, oh, and then it's like eating habits and stuff like that, or like binturongs they smell like popcorn,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
like you're suddenly just like, oh, why does it smell like popcorn? And everyone's like, oh, why does it smell like popcorn in here? All of a sudden, you're just like, uh oh,
Yeah.
you're like,
I'm gonna head out
you're
now.
trying to cover it up and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know. It's like the binturong one kind of sounds really fun because binturongs have a lot of aspects I like
Yeah.
as a creature, and it's like it's always a fun little critter I love.
Hmm.
So I'd either go for a cat or a wolf or a binturong. You're asking me if you're asking me for one though, I'd probably say the binturong.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. I love that you approached it from the lens of like the realism as well as like how you deal with it afterwards. So I'm gonna approach the question in the same way for the sake of being fair. So I'm gonna pick a real animal and I have to think about like all the ramifications. Okay. So I have an inanimate option. We'll leave that to for a second. If when
Mm.
it comes to animal, I think I would pick a lynx. And the reason why I think I would pick a lynx is because, well, of course, there's the obvious parallel to like, oh, they're kind of like lombaxes, but it's not really that. It's more around the fact that like, I think that could be at least a somewhat reasonable-ish size that could still be like taken in by someone potentially that I trust while also still being a big cat because I love them, B, having big bappers because I love that,
Mm.
and three, just like still having like a decent kind of mix of diet. I think like all those things would actually come together quite nicely. So that would be my first pick. The other pick I would pick because I think it would be so interesting would actually be a mannequin TF. I think that would be a really interesting one to have happen over the course of a year. And like there's less to think about from like the final ramifications because it's like now you're an object. But I think that would be cool to see explored as like a year-long process too, because it's also like you would be more able to kind of conceal the changes up to a point, but then after like the things start to affect your face and stuff, it's like all bets are off. Like you are not going to be holding that in very much longer. So those would be my two picks.
Oh, those are two very, very good picks. I like the mention about thinks as being like lombaxes. I can't unsee that now.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yeah. Every time I've gotten like Art of My Sona, but it's in like a D&D setting or something, and so like we have to like file off the serial numbers. Lynx is my go-to like stand-in, so it works pretty well.
oh, I mean, very clever. And I approve of the big bappers as well. That's always a good reason to choose a critter.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Oh
That's
man.
really It's interesting with the mannequin actually, because that's actually a very good point. It is probably the most concealable one, but it's like that's different. Like with an
Yeah.
animal, it's like you still have your subconscious, you're still thinking. But with a mannequin, it's almost like another level because it's like, or any sort of inanimate object,
Yeah.
it's like, it's that potential idea of, well, I still think, well, I still feel, what's going to
Yeah.
happen to me afterwards. It's like,
There's
that's such a really interesting idea.
Yeah, there's so much existentialism you can grapple with there. I mean, I have my own thoughts on what I'd like ideally with a mannequin TF in terms of how the mind would change. I think it would very much be like still
Ooh,
there, but like focused on quote unquote those kinds of objects' thoughts about like, wanting to be like displayed and stuff and like enjoying that. But
ooh,
like there'd still be
yeah,
something there in my mind, but there's so much you can in mine with that idea, I think. And I think that's really interesting that there's just so many different possibilities you could build out of that. So
absolutely, yeah. Sorry, it's just like petrification in a way.
yeah.
Like, I really like statue TF, and it's like that same mentality of, you're aware of it, almost, but you only have thoughts of like, oh, I want to be on display, or I want to like, get people's attention or something like that.
Yeah, it's super cool. And it's funny, I think that kind of plays nicely into our next topic because one thing that I've always encountered that I'm sure you have too is there's like this fixation to some degree within the community as to like permanent TF versus temporary TF. Because when we talk about transformation, obviously all of us would like to experience many different TFs, and there's the kind of like quintessential like, oh, I'm really into permanent TF, but then I want to be permanently TF'd into something else, which I always find funny. But I was curious to, I guess, as like a kind of an entry point, what are your thoughts on like permanent TF versus temporary TF? Do you lean towards one or the other, or do you find that they like coexist quite nicely in the work that you do?
Oh, this is such. See, it's like it's such a middle ground for me. Sort of, I would
Mm-hmm.
say sort of, but it's like the two sides of me. Like one side's like the really TF fanatic side is like, oh my god, yes, I want to TF as everything and anything all at the same time. Like, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
I want to be all the Binturong. I want to be all the dragon. I want to be all the cow. Like, I
Yeah.
just want to be this, and this. Like, everything sounds almost appealing, but I also still really, I personally kind of, I think I have to sway towards permanent in a way, because
Hmm.
it's like that side of me that's like into the whole dark sort of like punishment, blah blah blah, the
Yeah.
long TS and all that stuff. Like, the more, what's the word, uncommon traits in TF and stuff like that. I like the idea of like literally that's it. If you wanted to be a wolf, that's it. You're not. That's your one thing. You're not turning it back. You can't change your mind. Like,
Yeah. You're locked
whether you
in.
change your mind or not, that's it. That's locked in. It's almost like that chastity sort of thing. It's like, oh, like it's like locked, stamped, and that's it. It's too late to go back now. You
Hmm.
can't undo it. You can't stop it. No, nothing. I that's really spicy and good in my books. Like,
That's such an
especially.
interesting metaphor. I'd never thought of it in like that way. Like from like the chastity angle, I'd never thought of it that
Mm-hmm.
way before. That is really interesting to me that you phrased it that way.
That's what it's kind of what I think of it almost like. If you think about it, it's kind of like, you're locked in. It's like, I mean, obviously you could kind of, I guess, go off and do things and like chastity, but like,
Oh, of course.
it's like that's it. You're going to your destination, whether you like it or not, whether you want it or not. And it's like you're gonna stay like that forever. What happens afterwards, it's not anyone's problem but yours. Like, you know what I mean? And it's like it works really hand in hand, in my opinion, with long TFs almost like,
Oh, of course, yeah.
like you spend all this time TFing. It would be quite funny if you just suddenly puff back in like a day or something. You know what I mean? But it's like the idea of like spending so long TFing and then that's it. You know,
I would pay
that's
good
the rest of
money.
your
I would
life.
pay good money to see someone do that. It'd be like, ah, yes, my painstaking TF, and oh, now I'm human again. After all that time.
Finally, I am now the bear I always wanted to be. Oh no. It's tax season 2.
You're banking on getting away with your multi-million-dollar fraud, and oh no, now you can't.
When you wish to become the real Mr. Beast
Yeah.
instead.
Oh my gosh.
Oh no. Oh, that would be such a funny idea.
It would be.
Oh, I hope someone does that one day. If not, I will. Like,
Oh,
just make a really long, elaborate sequence slash comic of it, like being really long, and then at the end, it's just like 2 panels, and then that's it.
yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so fascinated by that connection, that metaphor. That's so interesting to me because I never thought about it that way. But I guess that is kind of like part of the allure to like a permanent TF of, obviously like not being able to change again. And one of the things I think about when it comes to this topic is that I'm someone who is very indecisive. I don't like being stuck in one kind of like path in life or locked into one kind of decision. I always like to have the option to back out or to like try and like correct course in some way. And I think that was what always drew me to temporary stuff, but I do enjoy permanent stuff as well. And I think kind of like what you were describing, again, I didn't really like think of this connection, but for me, one of the things that's cool about permanent TF is that if it is like in a certain way that at least in terms of like how I enjoy it, it's almost like you are now that thing and you're kind of content that there is no more decision or possibility to be made after that point. Like obviously, there's lots to explore in post TF, but the idea that that change was an option, something that anyone could potentially access or be subjected to or whatever, and you have experienced it, and that's it. Like you are that thing now, and you don't have the ability to go back and be like, oh, but what if I had changed into this or that, but instead having that like comfort of like, this is my form and I feel like at home in that form, which I guess like ties to in some degrees like how we've talked in the past about like Therian stuff of almost like I am in this form and it feels right, I guess, to some degree. I guess I'm kind of like I'm co-opting that a little bit here, but like going into like a permanent TF and then at the end being like content in that form, or your mind has changed so that you're content in that form. I think that can be quite appealing, and it takes out the indecisiveness that sometimes, at least for me, comes with the idea of temporary TF, because it's like, oh, I could be so many different things and I'm going to cycle through all of that. Don't get me wrong, I would love to do that, and I probably would pick that over permanent TF, but there is something nice about permanent TF where the decision has now been taken out of your hands, and like you said, you just have to kind of deal with it now.
It's almost like, because I know kind of how you feel about that, because I'm the same. I'm very indecisive. I mean, have you seen all my personas, for God's sake? It's like every day literally, we went to the zoo yesterday and I was like, I had a red panda sona once. Oh, I have a binturong sona. Oh, yeah, I was a hyena once. And my friends were just joking like, well, you're just everything, aren't you? And I'm just like, yep.
I mean, that is the nature of TF to some degree. I feel like we all like cycle through stuff.
I think it's a curse and a blessing to be a fan of TF, because you can't decide on anything. You just can't. You're just indecisive by default. I feel like in a way, like what you were saying with the whole being indecisive and wanted to change all the time, it's almost devious in a way to be indecisive but then go for a permanent TF. Like, say for example, like you're like, oh yeah, I'm so indecisive, I just want to be everything, but then you're just like, this one time you're like, but what if I was permanent? You know what I mean? Like, you want to tiptoe down that road slightly and see how it feels. I mean, knowing for a fact you're kind of doomed. Like, if you go down that road, there's no going back, but there's something alluring about that gets you really excited in a way. You're just like, I shouldn't be doing this. This is not me. I'm not the type to, like, want to go back, like, not go forward and keep going. Like, this is not like me, but it's too late now, and this is it. Like, I made my choice and I can't go back. What do I do? Like, there's something about that I always find kind of, like, really, good. I'm trying to think of a good word to say.
It plays into like I think it really plays into the scenarios in particular where someone almost self-inflicts the TF for either like knowing or unknowing reasons, and then realizes to their chagrin, horror, pleasure, whatever, that's it. Now they are stuck in whatever it is they're gonna be, and they have whatever time the TF is gonna take to reflect on the actions that brought them to that point.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, having a slice of chocolate cake sort of thing. You're like, oh, I shouldn't do, like all this going on, but you have it anyway and you feel so naughty for it, but at the same time, it feels so good.
Yeah.
Like, it's like stuff you shouldn't do or shouldn't be kind of agreeing to do, but you do it and it's like, and then, you might turn around and go, oh, bum, I shouldn't have said yes to this, or, oh, dang it, this is going to be permanent, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. This is the perfect analogy that has now popped into my head is me every time I consume lactose while knowing I don't have my lactate pills. And in the moment I'm like, oh, it's so great. And then later I'm like, what have I done?
Oh, I think my girlfriend could absolutely vouch for that. It's like, yeah, I think she's every time off topics, like every time she's like, I'm gonna have ice cream. It's like, are you sure you want that? Or like we go out, we have coffee. She's like, yeah, have cream on it. I'm like, are you sure about that? She's like, yeah, yeah. And it's like, regret later on. It's like that sort of thing.
Oh man, that is such a relatable mood. But yeah, I think that's such a nice way to like bring in the parallel of permanent TF and how like in those situations it's almost like in the moment you're like, I will be decisive for once, and then it's like, oh god, I wish I wasn't decisive, but now I have no choice.
It's almost like if you're indecisive and you go, no, I'm gonna go for this, like if like for example, if someone came up to you and goes, do you want to, change into any animal you want, or do you want to just go for this one animal? And in the moment you might go, oh, I really feel like being a horse, and you're like, I absolutely 100% let's go horse, and then you're just like, it's
you
like
get there and you're like,
I guess one way it solves your indecisive problem, I guess, but at the same time it's like
yeah, it's like, what have I done to myself?
Yeah.
One of the things that I will say that has been mentioned before by like friends and such, I know this is something that I've talked about with Katana before, but the concept of there's an in-between between permanent and temporary, where it's like it's permanent but for like an indeterminate amount of time, and you know that you will like potentially turn back at some point, but you don't know when that time is. So it's like what was the word? I had it and now I forgot it. Indefinite. That's the word.
That's
Indefinite.
it.
Indefinite TF. I find that so cool because it's like, yes, it's like kind of permanent to some degree, and you get like all the kind of like nice features of like permanent, but there also exists the possibility to still go back and do something else. And I find that that's such a cool medium point between the two, and in particular for people who are like, I really like permanent TF, but I also want a permanent TF into something else. I feel like that's kind of like the solution to some degree of like that kind of tug between the two things. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I totally agree. Actually, I didn't even think about that one, to be honest. And now I'm just like, ooh, that one.
Yeah,
because it's like it plays into my interests. Because I like the whole like it almost works with my ideas of like how I like to perceive TF and stuff like that. Where it's like, if I had a victim, I'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna turn you into this the dog, for example. But I think about when and where, I might just make it go on a random timer, you know what I mean? I don't know when you'll turn back or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, that is actually a really good one, actually. I'm not gonna lie. Like, that indefinite, because that's like a whole new level.
Yeah.
Like, that's like literally the case of, is it gonna happen? Like, you might feel something like, oh, am I gonna turn it back? And it's like, no, you just, I don't know.
You just had a bowel movement or something.
Yeah,
it's like,
just like, no, it's just a trump. It's a little tump little thing, little toot. You know what I mean? Or you're hungry, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, no, I love that. And there's so much like cool post TF that can be talked about there too, because it's like, if it's indefinite, like obviously there's like the whole experience of like being there and not knowing when you're changing back. And then also like, if it's indefinite and you turn back, like, I don't know, like 5 or 10 years down the road, it's like, how much of you has like returned, and how much is like the part of you that really changed and developed while you were that animal? Like, are you going to have some of those mannerisms still, and it takes like a long time to unlearn them? Like maybe it's hard for you to resist like eating food from a bowl or whatever. Like, I think that's kind of cool. And like, there's so many like little quirks that can be mined from having gone through that kind of an indefinite TF.
That's actually a really cool idea, actually. So I was just thinking of an idea in my head based on that, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Where it's like, say for example, like a dominatrix, and someone's interested in puppy play.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay then. And then you just like, turn them into a dog. I keep going for dogs, but it's the most common idea, and it's actually a really good one in my opinion.
This is the dog TF episode, clearly. So
it's called the Bark Bark Boff Boff the Bark Bark Boff Boff episode. But it's like that idea of like, it's like you train the dog, and you're training the person, but you're training the dog. It's like they literally have that behavior into them,
Yeah.
ingrained into them, and then when they turn back, it's like, do they know any difference? Are they just gonna keep their behavior the same? Are they just gonna walk on all fours? You know what I mean? That's actually that's such a good idea. Sorry. I love seeing. This is why I love being on here, because it's like hearing these ideas. I'm just like, oh, it gives me like a good little like
Yeah.
creative jolt. Like, this is why I love TF, because it's so vast, and it's
Yeah.
so big and so much potential, and it really gets my creative juices flowing, because it's like there's so many areas you could touch on, and it's like stuff like that. For example, I never would have thought of that until it's brought up, and I'm like, yeah.
The possibilities are truly endless, and I really like that. It's like, oh, so much can be talked about. I mean, hey, that's why we've got so many episodes of this podcast, because there's just so much ground to cover. Like.
I know, right? And it just keeps on going. I'm just like, yes.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And, speaking of things that keep going, one of the things I wanted to kind of talk to you about a little bit was about kind of your creative process for creating comics and sequences. Because, that's one thing that I've seen you like constantly like have output to some degree. And I'm always so like interested in the process behind making those things, particularly comics. And I know we've like talked about this before in the show with other artists, but I think everyone has a unique perspective on like how they go about doing it. So, you've mentioned comics a few times yourself. So let's maybe start there. What is like your kind of thought process when it comes to creating comics? Like, where do you start?
I did illustration course in art for
Mm-hmm.
about 2-ish years.
Yeah.
And stuff I always got told, if I'm not very good at writing thumbnails, and literally it's not even a sketch, it's literally just a border and stick man. Like, you literally do the very roughness. Obviously, it's always good to write a script. I mean, I'm very guilty of just doing comics without scripts.
Mm-hmm.
I literally, when I was a kid and I used to make my comics, even if funny enough, not the TF based ones, but I used to do long going comics.
Mm-hmm.
I literally just doodle what's on my mind, and it's like, it's very inconsistent, and the pacing goes weird, and it's like, that's something I should definitely invest in doing. I hear a lot of people saying that, like, write down your idea, write down your plot, do a story. What's it? A beginning, middle, and end is always what I got taught, especially in university. And I'm just there like, I don't know. I just want to do a comic about someone turning into a wolf and dealing with that. I don't know where it's gonna end. I don't know what's gonna be the middle, but that's what I want to do. And it's like, everyone's different, and I'm obviously the type of person that seems to do it by the page rather than like by the script.
Yeah.
But what I normally do, if it's, for example, a commission, I normally get basically it depends on the idea and even the person, because you could kind of gauge what the person, like, some people have an absolutely brilliant vision of what they want,
Mm-hmm.
and I absolutely want to put that down onto paper exactly how they want it, or as close enough as I can. So sometimes if it's like a 1-page comic, I'll be like, what do you want on this page, or this panel, this page, this panel, this page? Like, you know what I mean? Like, panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, etc. Like, what do you want happening, what expressing, what words? Which is what I should probably do with mine, but
Yeah.
So I do that, and then I go on to the thumbnailing that I brought up before. So it's literally an extra step. So I go into thumbnailing, so I lay out the comic, and I go, okay, does this look good? Does this flow and stuff like that? I look up comic page layouts and stuff like that online, and like try and think of like examples of, like, if there's a scene I want to depict, like an action scene or something like that. I go to look at other TF artist comics, or even like anything related to that sort of thing, even if it's not predominantly TF related, just any sort of comic that has sort of like that sort of flow going, because I kind of do struggle doing comics. I feel like my comics are not my best suit, but I still love doing them anyway.
Really?
Like, I always get it. I think it's just the artist cursed, where you feel like you're always the worst, but it's literally like, sometimes I feel like I don't flow it that well, or it's just literally box, 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 box. But that's always something, that's obviously something I need to learn, and this is what I want to do with my next personal project, is to kind of one, make it a bit more comfortable for me, so that way I can take time to kind of learn things.
Hmm.
So I do thumbnails, and then I obviously I'll send them off, and then if the person's happy with it or I'm happy with it, and I get feedback, you know what I mean. Um, I'll start sketching it then. That's always the fun part. Um, and I'll start like doing. I'm trying to think of the word silhouettes. That's the word.
Oh, silhouettes.
I'll do
Yeah, yeah.
silhouette. Yeah, I started learning to do silhouettes now, especially for the environment, because it's trying to get the perspective stuff right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the panda comic I'm uploading at the moment, I literally was like, how am I gonna do this? So I was like trying to figure out in my head. So it's like I went into a really good idea I did was I went into a game called Zoo Tycoon 2, and I literally built enclosures and stuff like that to figure out what I wanted to do with that and take different pictures from there to
Oh,
try and incorporate into my pieces there. So that's something I do. I
that's
did
so
for the
cool.
comic. As well as looking back at my old pictures and going, okay, like my other comics I've done in the past based on the same environment, and going, if I was to do that again, how would I make that look nicer?
Yeah.
I know it's like it's a very elaborate thing. Some people literally go, "Yeah, I'd put it on. I don't know. I'd document it, sketch it, and then send it off." But I'm just like, I, don't, yeah, I always like to make things difficult and more uh prolonged, shall we say? But
Yeah, yeah.
so normally what I try and do is I try and flow the panels as much as I possibly can, because obviously I'm not the best at them. But I will try and figure out which ones need to be small, which ones might have something popping out of them. Like for example, a belly comes out the panel, so it literally gives like a 3D effect, a massive like it gives that oomph. Like sometimes,
Hmm.
like is that gonna look good? Um, which one needs the long shot? Which one needs like a small little like panel just to show something? Like what flows nicely, sort of thing.
Hmm.
And then if they're happy with it, I'll just send it off again and then start lining and coloring, cry, and then hopefully they like it.
Hopefully, the cry phase isn't too common.
I'll tell you what though, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of cry mostly at the wording because there's one thing I am absolutely terrible at. I know I say like, oh, comics are like blah blah blah. I'm like, oh, I'm not the best at one thing I'm absolutely horrendously horrible at is I always do this, but I always forget to put space for the speech bubbles. I always forget to do that
Oh,
because obviously I can't. I'm not very good at spelling. And I'm not very good at writing. So I very often ask people to write me a script, and if they give me a very basic script, I'm like, oh. Or some people write too much, and I'm like, there's too.
how do I fit
Which
this?
one's which one's bigger? Which one needs to be in the picture more? The actual human or the words? I don't know which one needs to be. Because obviously, I'm just like, if that's what they want, that's what they want. Or like, if this lore needs to be told in this story part, then it needs to be told. But I don't know how to fit it in. So that's always the hardest part for me, for example. So I always try and fit it in like small little sentence, more
Mhm.
TF. That seems to be the good. People don't want to look at the words; they just want to look at the TF. That's what I try and do.
Well, I mean, I think that the reaction with the words can help, but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, people are most interested in the visuals, so I totally get
I
that.
mean, that's what I like to tell myself. What I like to comfort myself with. It's just be like, it's okay. I just want to look at the TF. Like sometimes I do try and fit in like wording, like prompts and stuff like that to like make it more engaging or like a bit of zest, kind of like ooh. But it's like if it's like a tease in TF, like add all that like cool little spicy language.
Yeah.
But it's like if I don't know what to write or anything, I'm just like I'll just put something generic and just hope that no one sits there and goes, "Oh, that's a very quiet comic."
Oh my gosh. So then I have to ask you're also thinking about obviously the flow of the comic or the sequence or what have you, how do you generally, and I guess this is outside of course, commissioner requests, but like when you are like given more free reign or you're doing it for yourself, like how do you pick the features that will change from like one part to the next? Like, do you go into a piece and you're like, okay, this one, it's going to start with the ears because XYZ, or as you're drawing it, do the changes kind of come to you based on like how a prior frame or a prior frame in the sequence was?
I think it depends on the situation. Like if, for example, uh, like if it's a comic based on someone turning into an animal via eating, it might start from the mouth and then travel down the throat. Like it start from the mouth and head, and maybe I like show it from the head, and then
Hmm.
put the show. Trying to think of how to word this. Show start with the head, and then the next panel will be like the chest, and then maybe the arms. Like
Hmm.
slowly show it moving down the body. But I like to think of. I'd like to try and think of it as a continuity sort of thing. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I like to do parallel TF like pages or panels, should I say? So like say if one fits TF in and the other fits only just started to TF in, but both the panels are together. So it's almost like the feet are together almost. I always like doing that sort of thing as well. I also like to try and think of what things do I know that the TF fandom like a lot in when it comes to TF. So it is like you said, the ears or the tail, for example. I always like to emphasize on really kind of make the tail go like, or the feet,
Yeah.
like. But it's like it depends on. For me, it generally does depend on sort of like how the story's flowed up to this point. So, for
Yeah.
example, if it's a clothing, maybe it'll start from the clothing and then spread up and down. So maybe I show it from the shirt, and then the next panel will be like the arms and the hands, and then the next panel will be like the neck and the head and stuff like that. So it's really cool though because it can literally go either way really. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like overwhelming how you could possibly draw TF happening in a comic because you're like, I want to do it like this, then I want to do it like this. But it generally depends on what I want to show more importantly right now.
Hmm.
Like both with TF comics for commissioners and also for myself. It's like, what do I feel like showing off today?
Yeah.
Basically. Like what if I because I did some TF comic commissions a while ago. Each one I've tried to make semi look different from the last, so that it's not like the same stuff being shown.
Yeah, of course.
Um, it's just like, but also like I want to see like what I can do privately and go, well, this part doesn't get touched on quite so often. So like like a demi TF muzzle or tailbone growing out or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it's just like, what do I feel like showing off today? Really, that's kind of what I do. Like, do I feel like being really creative and maybe showing the top panel being like the head, the panel underneath that one being the arm, and the panel underneath that one being the belly, and then the panel underneath that one being the feet? You know what I mean? It's like, what do I feel like being today? Or do I feel like being like spontaneous and drawing them everywhere, or do I feel like actually trying to make it flow today? I don't know.
You can
To be
play
fair, I
around with
just
it.
exactly. To be fair, I just sit there and I go, "What looks nice?"
Oh, that's great. Oh man. Yeah, no, I think that it's really cool that it kind of just depends on not only what are you kind of in the mood for, but also like keeping it varied from what you've done like in the recent past. Because I think that oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this too, sometimes it can feel nice to kind of sit in the same sort of progression that you generally get. And so it can be really nice to change it up because, like we've said before, TF has an unlimited amount of possibilities. So, it's good to keep yourself open to all of the ways in which that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like something I always kind of think of as well when I'm thinking about these comics, especially the batches that I did.
Mm,
It's almost like it's going to be a portfolio. It's
yeah.
literally a showcase of like each comic page or each comic per person, whether it be mine or whether it be someone else's. I need to show what I can do almost, if you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
if I did the same, if the person asked for the same things, fair enough. That's some people do ask for the exact same things, and it's just like a weird coincidence, almost scary coincidence. If it's just a whatever comic or if it's just artistic freedom, I like to try and show off bits differently. So then, it's a bit more stand out from the last comic. So if someone wants to see it the same thing, they will do, but it will just be a different angle or a different progression. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I like to try and do when I come up with comics. if I can, obviously.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's a really great way to think about it. So, I guess then, as a final question here, what kind of thing have you not yet gotten to make a comic for that you're absolutely dying to make a comic about?
So, this is going back to something I've been sort of blathering out about
Mm-hmm.
slash mentioning at the beginning, is I'm literally, now that my workload's starting to clean up finally, um, and I've actually got some free time, I'm very excited to start working on something I've wanted to work on, I would say, for about 5, 10 years, for a
Wow.
very, very long time.
Wow.
I'm gonna be fair, not started the script because things have changed, but it's something that happened. It's almost based on uh almost like real events that's happened to me,
Okay.
but it's twisted to be more in depth and more. Well, I'm trying to think of to describe it. It's more obviously like fantasy based because with what's
Of course.
happening, it's not, obviously I can't physically turn into that thing, but I'm just like, I keep having recurring dreams about it, and I'm like, obviously this means something, or obviously I'm just so TF brained that that's all I think about.
Yeah.
But it's like these reoccurring dreams keep happening, and they're not the same, but they feel so real. And it's like, what if I made a comic on that?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like almost dreams to reality, and that's I'm trying not to give too much away because
Yeah,
one,
yeah,
I'm still
yeah.
planning it, and two, I'm just like I'm kind of like I'm still thinking of it, and I'm like I don't want to give too much away, but I'm gonna do a comic based on what if if you're having a reoccurring dream about something, like you're turning into something, and you can feel yourself turning into it, slash you feel
Yeah.
yourself being that thing, and you're just like, what if that came a reality? One day you woke up and you're just like, it's actually happening. Like, it's almost like
Oh.
those dreams were so reoccurring, and then they start really reoccurring to the point where it's almost like a warning sign to the point where you wake up and it's actually happening.
Oh, that's
Like,
very cool.
that's what I want to touch on because it's like, again, it's something that's always happened to me. Obviously, being a
Yeah.
TF person, I mean, I guess that it will, but it's like, it's based on something that's very kind of meaningful to me, and it's almost gonna help me in a way, sort
Mm-hmm.
of figure out some things, shall we say, but it's gonna have a lot of like in-depth stuff, so it's gonna be quite personal, but at the same time something that I feel like people would relate to.
Yeah.
Like, it's gonna be personal but relatable, but it's just like, I don't know, I'm very excited about it because it's like one of those things that I've been thinking about for years, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
do I do it? Do I not? How do I do this? Because I'm not very confident with my comic page panels. How do I do it? And then I found a comic I love, which is actually TF based. Actually, one of my
Oh,
favorite
nice.
comics I'm obsessed with is called My Dragon Girlfriend, and it's on Webtoons and I think Tapas.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I know which one you're talking about.
I'm absolutely obsessed with them. I'm absolutely obviously I've got like I'm like a proper high Patreon with that with the artist Courtney. I'm just like, I bought one of the plushies at the moment. I'm like, I got prints, I got commissions. I'm like, oh, my girlfriend introduced me to that comic like I think a year ago, and I'm like, I'm obsessed with it. And I'm like, what if I did something like that, but also like a bit of a spin where it's like, trying to live day by day as this thing that you can shift in and out of.
Yeah.
But it's like, I always wanted to touch on I never get to touch on this too often, but it is literally like we were talking about the long TF mixed in with how do you deal with that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've never gotten to touch with that, and I want to include that in my comic. So I think, hopefully, I've answered your question there, but
No, I think
I'm
you
trying to.
have. You've got to stay vague, and I respect that. You got to protect your artistic integrity, but I, for one, am looking forward to that whenever you do put it out. So,
I mean, I'm going to be fair. It is a very generic idea in a way. It's literally to do with wolves, for example. To be
well,
honest, it's
whenever it
not original,
happens,
but
I'm sure you'll do a good
but
job with it, though.
yeah.
Oh, well, I guess then I wanted to touch on the last topic that we had on our docket, and that was kind of around the idea of TFEs who undergo changes and then kind of become they interact socially with other humans, be it as a companion or as like a hindrance or some other kind of way. And I guess, when we were kind of talking about this topic before, one of the first things that came to my mind was like familiars and, pets and things like that. But I guess I was curious to ask you, when you think about people who TF and then interact with humans, where does your mind immediately go to? Like, is there a specific kind of role that you like people who have been TF to play in the lives of the humans around them?
Um, I have this weird thing where like I kind of like it as like almost like a work animal, but not quite like it's like it could be a work animal or it could be a pet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or something that is that sort of symbiotic relationship in a way where it's like, you give one thing and you get something in return. Like they both work together to achieve the same thing. Like
Yeah.
as I mentioned uh before this we were just talking about I saw a piece recently where someone was turned into a racehorse,
Yes.
and I was like, they're just talking to the other person. I'm like, they're just having the general discussion. Like, that's like, it's one piece, but it's saying so much. It's like, these two obviously know what's going on. They know, it's like, come on, turn into this thing. Let's get this over with. Let's do this. It's like, there's also been something similar to that where it's been someone turning into a dragon to, I think they were traveling. I can't remember. It was on Twitter and it was a really cool artist.
Mm-hmm.
They had a pig for an icon. I can't remember their name. I can't remember their name. But
It
they
was
turned
was
into
it
a
drop
dragon.
pigs?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
drop
it.
pigs. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, they do amazing stuff like that where it's like, they kind of like consensually turn into the animal to try and get to benefit both the person and, the TFR. It's like that's a subject I don't think about too often, and that's also a subject I'm also really interested in. And it's like, but I don't quite think of ones that really stick out other than ones like a working animal, so like a sled dog. Like, say for example, it's snowed in. You got to get to work, or you got to go pick someone up. Your friend turns into a sled dog and pulls you along. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I like stuff like that where it's like, you know, um, oh, I can't get the post out. Can you turn it to a messenger pigeon so that way we can go, so I can send it via messenger pigeon? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's helping someone else out, or like a guide dog, for example, or like a therapy animal, something like that. Like both that could play to both sides. Like it's something that's really interesting in my opinion that I've just never thought about until now.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting you mentioned the therapy and like guide dog animal kind of element because I don't think I've really seen much of that in transformation pieces. Oftentimes, when I think about, people who TF and then become some sort of an animal companion or what have you to people, it is either like, oh, you've become a farm animal, now we're putting you to work, or it's like you're
yeah,
becoming a familiar for a witch. So you don't really see, or like a traditional pet, I guess, but like, I don't think you really see much outside of those three. So it's interesting to hear you mention like the guide dog one as an example because I'm sure it exists. So I'm sure someone has done it, but you don't typically see people do it in that way.
I guess maybe it's because the people might find it a bit like sensitive, I guess. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I feel like if it's not really kind of like being anything controversial, if it's just a wholesome thing, then it's a wholesome thing. There's
Yeah.
no like any other meaning to it, then I think it's fine. Or like the therapy pet idea, I actually find to be very, very sweet because we all go through tough times, and it's like, can you imagine like the idea? Like, let's just imagine just having being able to turn into a therapy animal for someone else for that moment when they need it. Like,
Yeah.
that's in my opinion really wholesome. Like, and it's like, oh, it's like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like, it's just no strings attached, no. no dark meanings, no like you know what I mean, no ifs or whats. It's literally just a wholesome TF.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And, I mean, hey, we've talked a lot about like devious punishments and such, but like it's also good to have those more wholesome TFs too. And I think that that's definitely an interesting way to think about them. But then I guess my question would also be like, when you think about that kind of a concept and how the creature then interacts with people, obviously those have very like specifically defined societal roles. So do you kind of gravitate to that because you like the idea of fitting within those roles, or like within like the ideas you have? Or alternatively, are you thinking about it in a way of like, what if I became this thing and then I can maybe like contravene that in like my own unique way?
Sorry, what do you mean by contravene?
Like, is it do you think of it as a way to like break out of that role, like to do something slightly different that wouldn't be necessarily expected? Like maybe I'm gonna TF into an emotional support animal, and that's kind of part of the thing, but also I'm gonna like do something more like off the wall too. Like maybe I'm also going to be a rescue animal too at the same time or something. I guess I'm trying to think like, do you like having that as like the end point and that's just what you do, or do you like that as a starting point to also become something else?
Uh, I kind of just I like it as like as a thing to do. Really, I like it just
Mm-hmm.
like it's just something that's part of their lives almost like, and they're just like, This is what I could do. Let's see what I could do with it," sort of thing. Like they've got this ability, and that's just their way of life. But like it's what they do with it that makes it the interesting part. Like if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I one of the things I really like about the whole idea of like TFEs as animals then interacting back with humans is the social connotations of like, if it's with people that they used to know and the person may or may not realize that the TFE is the person from before. And
Mm.
one of the cool things that I always enjoy, and this is, I guess, a common trope, but it's like the idea of you are an animal and you're trying to like find ways to alert the person that you are like the former person, be it like, for example, oh, you're now a farm animal, and your friends all like frequent this farm or whatever, and so you frequently see them, and it's like, how do I try to tell them that the cow they're seeing in front of them is actually their former friend, and like different ways to try and express that. And I think that that kind of trying to surmount the communication barrier is a really interesting element of the like formerly human now turned animal person with other people just broadly within TF scenarios. So I was curious to get your thoughts on that too.
That's actually a very interesting idea, actually. That's not really touched on too much. From what I remember seeing, I've seen it in a lot of like shows, for example, like
Yeah.
movies, like The Shaggy Dog,
Oh yeah.
like the Tim Allen one. I remember that one very, very like much so, because he spells it out with was it the
Yeah,
the
the Scrabble letters.
Scrabble,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it.
yeah.
He's like, I am dad, and it's like, it's like that's something that doesn't get touched on often. I feel like that's actually a really good subject to really touch on because it's like, how like, would you want someone to figure out who you are? Like, what if you had like something on you that made it pretty obvious who you were, like a necklace or a bracelet? Or would you try and show them that it's you?
Hmm.
And then it's like, where do you go from there? You know what I mean? Like, if you're a cow, how are you gonna get that cow back home if you even can? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many possibilities of that alone.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
actually find
absolutely.
really interesting. Like, I actually really like that idea now that you think about it.
Yeah, I think it's just such a cool thing to play with because it's like, once when we talk about obviously post TF, it's like there's a whole life that you're going to have to acclimatize to, but also like, what if the way to get like better conditions in that sense is to alert people to what you used to be, right? And so it's like it becomes a challenge of like, I know that this person knew me. How am I going to try and communicate to them that A, I'm used to be a person, and B, to try and get them to help me in some way, be it because, oh, maybe I'm like a cow and they milk me too often or something. It's like, I'm looking for a way out of this situation, or at the very least a way into some better conditions or something. I think that can be a really interesting trope to kind of explore in the world of like transformation and post transformation.
Yeah, I guess like if you're like, for example, if you're wanting someone to know who you are, it's almost like someone's going to keep an eye on you. So like if you're a cow, it's like, you kind of hint to the farmer, you're just like, yeah, I'll keep an eye on that one. I'll buy that one off you. You keep it, but don't do anything without my consent. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's almost like if you're wanting to know who, like if you're wanting that sort of like human interaction, it's like almost trying to figure out how do you tell that person it's you.
Mhm.
It's like it's actually yeah.
And even like you can even think about it from like a pet angle in the sense of like, I'm sure like whoever your owner is like a decent owner, but it's also like, how do I also like communicate to them that like the reason why I'm being like so compliant with vet visits or like so okay with being groomed is because I get where you're coming from, because I used to be a person just like you. And maybe if you know that about me, then you'll also like, I don't know, just have like a different level of like understanding as to where like I'm coming from when I'm like acting up as an animal,
Or like imagine if you're like you got TF'd via a vet, and it's like that's why you're like really hesitant to go back, because
Oh
like
my god,
anytime you go
yes.
back to a vet, even if it's not the same vet, it's like I don't want to go back because that's where I ended up, and this is how I ended up as this.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's always such a good idea.
Or alternatively, it's like you keep going back to the same vet because the vet keeps like giving you the additional like booster you need to keep you an animal. That could be quite
Yeah.
interesting.
Oh, that would be cool.
We're just handing out TF ideas. That's what we're doing today.
I mean, that's what we. I mean, this is the Bark Bark Buff Buff
It's
episode, so
true.
we're also handing out some, we're being good and handing out some ideas. That's always the fun of these podcasts. Though
Oh
it's
yeah.
always fun to just see if we can help kind of get some creative juices flowing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, I am fully down to go to a cursed vet and become a good girl. So, like, if that's an option, please, like, let me know. I'll make my appointment ASAP. So,
I think there'll be a long, long queue.
yeah, there probably would be. Let's be honest. Oh, amazing. So, we have a few audience questions that I did want to make sure we still had time for. So the first question comes from Professor Scritch. And Professor Scritch asks, do you have a comfort TF? A specific kind of TF that you go to whenever you're feeling down or stressed. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one.
Yes, actually. Something I always kind of like dreamed about slash daydream slash drew, or even I used to write stories way, way,
Mm-hmm.
way back in like secondary school.
Yeah.
It was always the wolf. I was very much a wolf kid back in the day. I still am,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd always say my comfort TF is a wolf. There's just something about them that always stood out to me as a kid, and it's always just stayed with me. And there's something, just the idea of just turning into this like big canine that's like got a majestic slash like almost spiritual sort of feel about it. It's like I always find like really comforting. It's just the idea of like, what if you're, because I love walking around in the woods. So
Yeah.
what if I just TF'd into a wolf and just ran away like for a while in the woods? Just went out and just had fun. Like it always like kind of makes me go, oh, that'd be nice.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think the ability to just like vibe in the forest away from people, like there is something uniquely appealing about that sometimes. So I can totally see where that angle is coming from. Um I feel like I'm so predictable at this point. Like, yeah, my answer is gonna be a pool toy TF. Like, yes. Throw your tomatoes.
Not a Lombax?
Well, I mean, so like yes, that would be like my other answer. It definitely is like a comfort TF for me, and like so much of like Lombax TF for me is tied to like my own like kind of personal journey as a person. So
Mm.
like those TFs are always like really personal to me and like bring a lot of validation. But sometimes if I'm like feeling like uber stressed or something, I'm going to pick pool toy because there's an element of like no thoughts head empty. Like I don't have to like worry about whatever anxiety is bothering me because I'm just going to be a squeaky pool toy. And now I don't have to think about those things because my head's full of air and I just want to be like, like played around within the pool and like, have a good time. So I think when it comes to like being stressed, it would be pool toy. If it's I'm feeling down, then it would be long XTF. So that's how I'd parse that question.
Very interesting. I see what you mean though about that. It's like a portrait actually would be very interesting because it's literally a case of head empty, but also you're also helping the stress level of yourself and others, like you said, with playing with other people.
Yeah. And I think that there is something uniquely fun around like I'm no longer stressed out and I'm also like being like a de-stressing tool for other people. So it's like I am spreading the like de-stress vibes around by like being in that form. And I think that's like a nice way to like pay forward the TF that I would initially be doing to like help myself, It's like it's going to help me and now it's going to help other people, which I like. So
I mean, imagine this is a cool idea of what if you had your stress levels so high that you'd literally turn into a pool toy to cool yourself back off, like back down,
oh.
and then rinse and repeat. You know what I mean? That would be so cool.
Oh, that would be so good. Oh my gosh. Oh, I would love that. That would like solve so many of my problems.
Oh my god, I tell you that, yeah.
Oh man, yeah, a stress triggered pool toy TF. I can get behind that. I would be down.
Write that down.
Yeah, write that down. Oh
Add to the
man.
list.
And then the other question we have is from No Way, and No Way asks, "What was the first TF art piece or story that you can recall seeing or reading?"
Oh, what was the first art piece or story? Um, ah, gosh. See, now that I'm thinking about it, I can't remember. But I guess,
I can go if you need time to think.
yes, you're welcome to go
Okay.
first, whilst I try and remember.
So if I have to go based off of just like exposure to media writ large, one of the first things that comes to mind is Magic School Bus used to have these educational CD-ROMs. I think I've mentioned this before, but there was one around dinosaurs, and one of the things you could do in the dinosaurs game was you could TF two of the Magic School Bus characters into part dinosaur, part people. And that really lodged itself in my brain, and my young brain did not know how to comprehend that. And so, anyways, that was definitely one of the first times. In terms of like the actual, like, first explicitly, like, this is a TF art piece and it is on a TF website or something, it would probably be the Were Shark piece that I found on Transfer that introduced me to Transfer because I was interested in like writing a Were Shark story at the time. And it was actually from the Island of Dr. Moreau, like Gaia Online role-playing website. They were like doing like illustrations of the different stages of this character. And so this character was turning into a part shark, part wood plant. And I think that's a very like interesting combination in retrospect. And I've never really seen anything like that again. But that sequence is still up and it's very good. And I highly recommend it if you are ever perusing Transfer. Go into the shark tags and find that one. It's a very good sequence. So
Shark and aquatic animals always have like very interesting like ways of uh being drawn as in TFs and stuff like that. But see, does it have to be a TF art piece
no, it can
or
be a story. Or it can be anything. I'm going to say it can be anything if you don't want to pick one of
Yeah,
those two.
I generally can't remember a story. I guess I would say off the top of my head, I guess Animorphs, but obviously I couldn't read it, so I literally just I guess it counts as an art piece as looking at the cover and the little flicky. Oh, what's the word?
The
Oh,
flip
I forgot the
pages, the
word.
flip book.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
flip
yeah.
pages. That's legit all I remember. But I grew up watching The Swan Princess and the live action Pinocchio back in the day. So those were the two that really stuck out to me,
Yeah.
especially The Swan Princess, because that was like the live action Pinocchio one was like it was kind of brief. Um, from what I remember, it was like
Yeah, it's not a
it was
huge
literally
long
like
one.
no, they literally just go under the waterfall and then that was it, I think, from what I remember.
Yeah.
But with the Swan Princess, it's literally over and over again, and it's like, trying to battle it and stuff like that. And it's such a clever idea where like she only turns back at night,
Yeah.
and during the day she's stuck as a swan. I was like, oh, that was really neat.
Yeah, I love
But I
that
can't
one.
remember any TF pieces. I generally can't, which is so ironic of me, but
Well, I think those are still two very good answers. Um, we actually have a third question, and it's from Bolus. And Bolus asks, what's the most visceral and awful live action TF you've ever seen? I've answered a permutation of this before, so I'll just say it again. It's definitely Hemlock Grove. I do not like that TF. I genuinely do not like that TF. It's really gory and just the eyes fall out and I'm just like, no, I don't want this. So yeah, I just not a
no
fan.
bueno.
No bueno. I don't like that one. Like all the people who are into that, like go off, like enjoy your TF. I support you, but it is not for me. So yeah, Hemlock Grove is the one that really sticks out in my mind as like, no. And again, like I like horror based TF, so it's kind of funny that I'm picking a quote unquote horror based TF, but just that one, ooh, I just can't do it. I can't do it.
See, I guess there's like a limit, you know what I mean? Like, everyone has their limits when it comes to even like something they're interested in.
Yeah, I think it's the eyes for me. I have very
Mm,
specific like squicks around like eye trauma and like eyeballs, and so that
mm.
one, like I'm just like, no, I can't do it. So
I guess for me, the worst one I remember was like I don't even know, I generally don't know if this is actually a real TF or if this is like a mock TF, like a joke
mm,
TF. But it's that one that I've see circling like once a year of that dude in the cave where a wolf goes past him, or it's a dog, obviously,
yeah.
and he's like sat in a cave, and then he starts like it like cuts to him, like it's like just shots of him like cutting with like hair growing up all around. It's literally like square patches of fur growing around his face, and then he just like tears into like this really like clumpy looking cool cat like werewolf looking thing. Honestly, it's honestly I think I see it like once a year, and I still to this day don't believe it's from a legit movie. And I mean, I absolutely love it because I love that sort of stuff, but it generally just kills me every time because it's so bad, it's so good. They literally just stick clumps of fur to him all over his face, and then it's like zap. Oh no, no! Like the dog looks into his eyes, and it's like laser eyes or something like that, and then
Yeah,
he
yeah.
starts like TF, and it's so funny.
I don't remember this one. I'm gonna have to like go and try and find it because that
Oh,
sounds hilarious. It sounds very
it's
campy.
it's very campy, and I love it.
Oh man. Well, that was all the questions I had for you. I don't know if you had any additional questions for me.
I do. I
Ooh,
actually thought about this
Ooh,
one.
okay.
I hope no one else has asked this because I'm pretty proud of it.
Okay, go for it.
So, if you have 24 hours,
Hmm.
you only have 24 hours, and you have 24 hours to TF into one creature, whether it be real or not.
Okay.
What would it be, and what would you do?
Okay, so I have 24 hours to become this, and then I have to like go back to being a human, or is it 24 hours and then I'll at the end of the 24 hours I'm stuck as the thing?
You have 24 hours to be that thing. So you got 24 hours to
Oh,
be like whatever you want to be, and what would you
oh,
do?
oh, that's hard. Oh, this is devious. Okay, 24 hours. I'm gonna revert at the end. What would I become and what would I do? Okay, hmm. Okay, this is probably not the answer you're expecting. So I think like part of me wants to pick just like one of my sonas, because that would be awesome. It would be really exciting. But like to go back to that, to go back afterwards and just be like, oh, I'm never gonna be that again, would like crush me. So instead, I'm gonna pick something that I think would be interesting, like both psychologically and from like a anatomy perspective. So I would go with an upside down TF, and I would go with fuck it. I would go with a rhino upside down TF.
Ooh.
And the reason why I would pick that one, first of all, speaking on the topics of dreams, I actually once had a very visceral rhino upside down TF dream that like was supposedly taking place over the span of like 2 or 3 weeks in my like dream. Anyways, very interesting. So that like got it kind of like stuck in my head. I very much like the idea of like getting bigger and all that stuff, and I find upside down TF to be really fascinating, but also in particular because there's such a timed element to it, I would really get to experience what A, that change would be like, and B, like what existing like that would mean. But I would also know that I would get to come back as a human at the end, because that's the kind of TF where I really like upside down TF. I go back and forth on the permanent element. And so getting to do that in a temporary way, I think would be really interesting. And then the funny part, I guess, to that as well is it wouldn't matter what I would want to do, because I would just do whatever the new rhino me wanted to do, because I would be the rear end. So I would just get dragged around for the ride for 24 hours. And I don't know, maybe some fucked up shit would happen. And then I'd like wake up in like a fucking wildlife holding cell 24 hours later. And I'm like, oh, here I am, I guess. And they're like, where the fuck did the rhino go? And I'm like, I don't know. Anyways, can I go home? So I think that would be kind of funny. But yeah, that's what I would pick.
First of all, I'm really sorry that but the image of the upside down TF, but the rhino. I'm so sorry. It made me think of that Ace Ventura bit when he's coming out the rhino.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, my brain just instantly went to that. But that's actually a really clever way of like putting it. It's literally the idea of like becoming something just to experience it, and also trying something different. But also like it's technically not even what you do. It's actually what the rhino does.
Yeah,
that's actually really clever.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just because I think if I tried to do one of my sonas, I'd just be so sad at the end of it, because I'd be like, I only got to do that for 24 hours. And like, obviously, don't get me wrong, I would still be happy I got to, but like the afterwards effects, I would just be crushed. So I was like, no, let's pick something that I would want to be, but only for a certain amount of time, and then I'll get an exciting experience out of it. And I mean, hey, maybe I'll like make some money off of it too. I can write a tell-all memoir about like the time I was a rhino's ass. I feel like that could be a New York Times bestseller, you know? Like, I don't know.
My life as a rhino's ass.
Yeah. Like, damn. I feel
Coming
like
soon to cinemas near you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man.
In 3D.
Oh, I would love that. I'd be like, oh, who would play me? I don't know. Like, let's get fucking Kit Harington to play me or something. I don't know. I feel like that would be an interesting one. The guy from Game of Thrones.
It'd be Chris Pratt, obviously.
Oh God. Oh God, no. No. I'd be so sad. Please, no, not him.
What about The Rock?
Okay, I'm not opposed to that, but he doesn't look even remotely like me, so I don't know how that would go over.
Maybe he could play the rhino.
He could play the rhino, yeah, you're right. That's true. He could play the rhino. Oh my God. Well, that was an amazing question, so thank you for that. And thank you so much for coming on again. I always have a great time chatting with you.
It's been brilliant as always. Thank you.
And so, of course, as always, if people are looking for your stuff, where can they find you?
They can find me on Furry Affinity, Twitter, and my Patreon.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I've got different names for different ones now, but mainly my Twitter one's BinturongBoss.
Yes.
But FA still is BinturongBoy.
Yeah, because they don't let you change
Patreon.
your name. So annoying.
Maybe if I throw enough money at them, they will someday. Patreon's also BinturongBoy as well. I'll see if I could change that as well, since I'm trying to rebrand a bit. But
that makes sense. Amazing. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. And thank you so much to everyone for listening. I hope you had as much fun listening as we did recording. And of course, as always, we will see you next week. But in the meantime, I hope that you stay hydrated. I hope you keep an eye on yourself and the temperature as things start to heat up, and that you get some good sleep, keep an open mind, and stay TFy. And we'll see you all again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.